there's even no notion about contract. If people come into being because we think we want to form this society, then we all benefit. Society came into being naturally. Society exists because that's for human survival. It's not possible to imagine a group of humans do not form a society. Human beings are different from other animals. So the first business for Mencius is to make a distinction between being human and being simply members of the animal kingdom. Being human, from Mencian point of view, is not only to develop a society that is congenial to human flourishing for everyone. And such a society is dependent upon the rulers, those people who are powerful, to provide an environment which is congenial to them. So this idea of the benevolent government, now people say it's very naive and sure enough, but it's an aspiration. Mencius is absolutely serious about that. And it is related to the idea that human beings are involved in self-realization because they always quest for meaning. No matter whether you're a farmer, you're a worker, and so forth, if you're just overwhelmed by your work, meaning is not totally irrelevant. So the quest for meaning is to say, what does it mean by being human? Human beings will have to learn to be human. Human beings will have to learn to be more human, and of course, through work. And that work ethic is not related to, it's of course related, but not primarily concerned about the acquisition of skills, your profession, or simply the acquisition of knowledge. It is basically to help you to be better human in the moral sense. And that's the reason why the first distinction between human and animal. The second distinction is between those human beings who are absolutely serious for the cultivation of their great bodies rather than the small bodies. So the distinction between rightness and profit. If you're committed to profit, you may be able to acquire a great deal of wealth and power, but you still serve your small body. Small body is closely linked with animal instinctual demands. You try to survive, you try to multiply, and so you are totally egocentric. Whereas the cultivated person try to develop the great body. So what is the small body? The small body is that 99% of the human nature which is comparable to animal nature. So Mencius say appetite and sex, that 99%. But that 99% only constitutes your small body because it cannot expand. This is a zero-sum game. If you have this kind of resources, you occupy a great deal, then other people will not be able to occupy it. It's for your centeredness, for your own survival. Sometimes you don't even care about your family members because this is what you ought to do. So this is called a small body. If you translate it to rightness and profit, the idea is rightness is not in conflict with profit, but rightness is a more long-term development of the person. Rightness is much broader. If you only search for profit, you become self-centered. Or if you search for rightness, profit is of course desirable, sometimes even necessary, but profit would be translated into certain kind of, not altruistic, certain kind of benefit to the society as a whole. So the notion is, in order to establish myself, I need to help others to establish themselves because I am essential relationships. If I don't try to help the people around me to develop, no matter how I try to develop, it's a rather diminished, rather limited sense of the person. So that's the small body. What is the great body? The great body is our ability to cultivate those inner resources we are born with, like a feeling of commiseration, which is sympathy, or the feeling of rightness, or the feeling of civility, or the feeling of knowing. All these feelings can be expanded, and there's no limit to the expansion of these feelings. That's why they're part of the great body. Now, if you push them, as you know from the great learning, that you start with yourself, you push that to the family, to government, all the way to or under heaven, which means international community, eventually you go beyond to nature, to the animal world, to the world of plants, even to the cosmos. So this idea of expansion, of course, it's highly idealistic, and yet from Mencian point of view, is intrinsic to every human being. That's the idea of cultivate your flood-like energy. Now, using the modern sense, this sometimes is very difficult to understand. Sometimes it's being abused or being distorted. If you study, I don't know how many of you study the Tai Chi or the breathing technique or the so-called Kung Fu. Whether it's Korean, whether it's Chinese, whether Japanese, the master will give you a lot of, on the surface, mystic idea. So when you cultivate, you sit, you breathe, your idea is to breathe the spiritual forces from the outside. It's not simply trying to cultivate your physical body. You open yourself up to nature and beyond. So what you breathe is to recognize you're not simply a human being. You can tap the resources of heaven and earth. Why you have to stand firm? Because like a tree, that will be able to get the nutrient from below. Of course, most of us will not be able to understand. And yet the assumption is very mentioned. The assumption is if you expand yourself, your body becomes enlarged. You're connected not only with your parents, but with the world and beyond. So some people say it's ecologically quite significant. What is nature from this point of view? Nature is not a collection of objects, like we study it objectively. Nature should be understood, this is a little bit difficult to understand, as communion of subjects. So you don't have any sense of the other, totally not connected with yourself. Everything is somewhat connected. This sometimes they call it concerned consciousness. You're concerned about everything because human beings are sensitive. And so the idea of rightness and profit is not two diametrically opposed categories. When Confucius said, don't talk about profit, talk about rightness, he's saying, if you talk about rightness, your profit will be realized. If you only talk about profit, rightness will be relegated to the background. So rightness is a broader category.